Hails and welcome to Rauta's Challenging the Classics. It's time to do yet another classic review, and this time, actually twice, Marduk has been able to invade this video series. This time it's time to go all the way back to 1996. Heaven shall burn when we are gathered. Now if that sentence rings a bell in your ears, it's because of Bathory. Bathory or Marduk, but let's be honest about it, Bathory was first there to coin this sentence, and Marduk, rightfully so, kind of paid a little bit of homage to the great Swedish masterminds of, well, first wave black metal. However, Marduk then again is all about second wave black metal, or at least that's how the story kind of began when they took part of the scene and style. And Marduk's history takes us all the way back to 1990s. So without further ado, it's time to talk about the album. It's time to talk about the band. Now, those of you who have been following black metal for a long time, that is decades now, have not been missed Marduk. I think it's kind of virtually impossible to ignore or go past Marduk without listening to it, in case you have been a black metal long-timer. And in my opinion, there's a good reason why not to ignore, because, I mean, Marduk is one of the torchbearers of Swedish black metal, or we could say black metal in the first place. I mean, they're one of the most active, whether it comes to albums or touring in the world of black metal. They have been always very, very solid and consistent in quality, as well as their own style of black metal. However, the band has not been without changes, obviously. Bands that have been here more than 30 years are kind of bound to have lineup changes and musical development or progression. And Marduk is no exception to that rule, obviously. So back in the 1990s, Marduk was very, very active with its music. I mean, Dark Endless 1992. In my opinion, not that great an album, but this is not about that. Then Those of the Unlight, only a year later, and once again Opus Nocturni, once again a year later, 1994. So 3 albums in 3 years. By that time, Marduk was already very, very solid, trustworthy name, much like so many Norwegian bands of the time, the early 90s, from 1992 to 1995. A lot of old school bands from black metal era, the first names of second wave, so to speak, were there to just, kind of make it so that they were the founding fathers of that given era and style. And Marduk was right there, very, very active, creating quality music, quality albums, and all that stuff. With 1996, well, the pace, I could say, or we could say, kind of slowed down, but not much. Now, if the first albums came in within like 1 year of each other, basically, like an album a year, from Heaven Shall Burn onwards, it was more like every album every couple of years, with the exception of the great Panzer Division Marduk, which was only 1 year later, Nightwing. But 1999, 2001, 2003, and then Plague Angel 2004. You pretty much see the whole deal here. And even nowadays, Marduk has been very active. I mean, if you take it all the way to 2018, when Victoria, their latest album so far, was released, it hasn't been more than 3 years, but, we can still see the pattern here. First 1 year, then 2 years, and from 2009 onwards, every 3 years. So Marduk has been very, very active, really hard-working veterans of the genre, of the scene, and so forth. But this time, like I said, we go all the way back to 1996, and their fourth album, Heaven Shall Burn, When We Are Gathered. Now, why I decided to do this classic review album is because actually it was on Facebook, where my pals were discussing this album. I think somebody had a photo of this vinyl with this kind of a goofy but kind of a cool cover art, right there, and people were discussing like how this album was a gem of its time and it's still very solid and all that stuff. And that kind of got me thinking maybe I should go and revisit some older Marduk ones, and decided to go with this one because I remember this being for a long time one of my favorite Marduks, or actually the favorite Marduk, until Panzer Division Marduk came and kind of took that title and the trophy, the gold medal album for me anyway. That's why I have reviewed it previously. But it's still not without its credit. I mean, Puncher Division Marduk might be even more intense in style than Heaven Shall Burn, but this is still very, very intense album in black metal standards anyway. Now it runs only merely for some 35 minutes, so roughly half an hour of an album, but that is all that is needed to just deliver you those blows against the fist of, against the face of God, like fist beating the shit out of that particular divine creature, as they say, and that's all you need to have there with these 8 tracks, which are mostly, but not all, fast forward, fast pounding black metal with intensity that only a few bands can surpass, if any. Anyway, Heaven Shall Burn is very, very intense album. It's fast tempo, but it's also very melodic. Now, nowadays there are lots of bands which go various ways and different directions, still being black metal. However, none of these are, well, not none, but most of them, they don't have the intensity, the aggression, and the sheer passion to do this kind of black metal, being very, very aggressive and fast paced all the way down, and still being kind of a catchy, if you will. I mean, it takes a lot of skill to make black metal album which is at the same time very melodic, very intense, fast tempo, and still be catchy, not just like one trick pony having this gimmick and that's it. Marduk was already able with this album, to show their skill set, be it about production, which is clear and powerful, yet still kind of thin in a way, but very, very fitting for this album. And also Legion's very kind of aggressive vocals, which are, in my opinion, still some of the better ones. Now, if you take a look at this lineup, you will see that there's only basically one member anymore left in the band. I mean, some say this was the kind of a classic lineup of Marduk, and of course, especially when we're talking about Marduk's vocalist position, people are divided between two camps. Some say Legion, some say Mortus, but doesn't really matter. In my opinion, both are really good, just a little bit different. But this is as much Legion's show as it is Morgan's. I mean, the guitars are obviously the thing why this album rocks so much. I mean, those kind of a buzzing guitars, which are like shredding skin more likely. And then those intense vocals, like right up to the top, spitting those words right out of the mouth of heathens and pagans and Antichrist's forces, and just, killing it. Now, there comes a twist with the 7th track, because until that moment, all these tracks, 4 or 5 minutes or so, they are very intense, fast-paced, and even though it slows down temporarily, it's mostly about beating the shit out of the forces of Antichrist and all that stuff. But with Dracul Vadonni di No in Transylvania, what a horrible title in ways to just like pronounce it and say it out loud. I think that is really the track that nails it here. Now, first of all, it's very different from all the other tracks here. And that already creates this wonderful contrast, because the band just slows down as it's supposedly this Panzerwagen, which later on kind of a Marduk became to be. But here it was like the track to make a difference. But also, it's not because of its pace, but it's because it's so much darker than most of the album, or at least that's how it feels, because, this album isn't about happy tunes or great hippie-go-happy melodies. It's all about being very dark and, violent and aggressive. But Dracul kind of lacks those more aggressive and intense things. But instead of being that violent, crazy beating machine, it's like this sinister marching force, like an army that is coming to you without nobody, able to stop it. So it's not fast and violent and aggressive, or maybe it's actually violent, but it's more like sinister. So it creates this wonderful contrast after so many fast-paced songs, and it's like almost by the time that you get there, you're sweating because of, oh, man, it has been. Well, obviously you kind of have to remove the intro there, so basically it's more like 5 tracks, but you get the idea. And after that, it becomes one again this entity of fast pace and violent passion and intensity when Legion comes to play. So this is like the wonderful kind of a curve there with this album. Now overall, this is, in my opinion, very, very consistent in quality and all style, except for this one track that is kind of the curveball. One could even say it's the plot twist of this album. Now, as much as I'm still enjoying this one, this is not as good for me as Panzerdivision Marduk. Not even with this kind of a curveball track. This is much like Opus Nocturne in a way that because has this structure, but maybe this is a little bit better. It's kind of hard to compare because Marduk has been very, very steady with its quality, doing these kind of a solid but little bit unsurprising albums. Mostly Marduk has been solid 8 out of 10 band for me. There's some which are better, and then there's some which are not that good. And Heaven Shall Burn is definitely an 8 for me. It could be 8.5, but I don't know, maybe it would have been something, a little something else than just struggle to make a difference. But other than that, there are no weak tracks, unless you include the intro, which is kind of a useless there. But then again, heck, it's only an intro. But all in all, very, very solid, very, very consistent, very enjoyable album. I gave this a few listens to kind of refresh my mind, and I was like figuring out what are the weak points on this album, and there are really none. This is a solid Marduk release, and it's kind of sad to say this lineup is no more, because this kind of a Marduk is kind of a classic Marduk. But then again, can we really complain, because the band is still very solid with its so much nearer lineup, which has basically all the different ingredients except for the guitar player, Morgan, who does the trick. Anyway, in case you haven't revisited this album for a long time, I say give it a go. It's a nice, refreshing album with that intensity, this kind of a barbarism, and all that stuff. Good album all in all, and definitely worth a classic status. Thanks for checking out the video. What is your opinion about the album? Let me know how you feel about it. Let me know how you like these classic reviews, and more importantly, what would be your suggestion or recommendation for next challenging the classic reviews. Write down your idea in the comment section and I'll think about it. Thanks and see ya.